Hey guys, I'm Rebecca from yarnandchai.com, and I'm going to teach you how to crochet the linen stitch baby blanket. This is an easy level blanket written in American Standard terms. It comes out to about 30 inches wide by 36 inches long, so perfect for a stroller blanket. For this pattern, you're going to need a J hook, which is a 6mm, as well as an F hook, which is a 4mm. Now your gauge for this pattern is as follows. With larger hook, the following pattern is 4 inches square, and I'm going to go ahead and put that pattern right on the screen. So if you crochet this pattern, you should come up with a 4-inch square, and this is just a square of the linen stitch, which is what we're going to be doing in the blanket. For yarn for this pattern, I used Lion brand Feels Like Butter, and it really is as soft as the name describes. It's a very soft, very plush yarn. It's also a very kind of dense yarn, so it does make for a kind of dense, heavier baby blanket, which is why I think it would work perfect for a stroller or a car seat. So this yarn is a super soft number 4 medium weight yarn that falls into the Aran subcategory. Now I'm actually working with the bonus bundle, which is a larger skein of yarn than the normal ones. This one has 590 yards in it, and if you go with the regular size skeins of Feels Like Butter, you're going to get fewer yards, so make sure that you are calculating the yardage that you need. For this entire blanket, you're going to need about 1,100 yards of this yarn or a similar Aran weight yarn. I did my blanket in 3 different colors. So I used pale gray for color A, about 390 yards. I used white for color B, about 320 yards. And for color C, I used lilac, which is about 390 yards as well. So if you are working from the bonus bundles like I am, you will have plenty if you just grab one of each. And again, if you're working from the smaller skeins of yarn, you're going to want to make sure that you calculate your yardage and make sure that you grab enough skeins. One last thing before we get started, please be sure to take a minute and read the video description below, because if there have been any changes or error corrections to this pattern since the publishing of this video tutorial, they're going to be listed in the video description under pattern updates. So let's get started. Alright, to start this pattern, we are going to start with the ribbing first. And so we are going to take our smallest hook. We're going to start with a slip knot, and we're going to chain 11. And now we are going to single crochet in the second chain from the hook and in each remaining chain. Okay, so my first chain on this hook is this one right here. So I'm going to go to the next one, and I'm going to single crochet there and in each remaining chain. And at the end of this, you should have 10 single crochets. For rows 2 through 144, here's what we're going to do. Same thing for all of them. We're going to chain 1 and turn our work. We're going to single crochet in the very first stitch. And then we're going to single crochet in only the back loops of the next 8 stitches. So this is the front loop, the one that's closest to me, and this is the back loop, and I'm just going to do a single crochet in only the back loop for the next 8 stitches, and that will leave 1 stitch at the end. So I have 1 stitch left, and I'm going to go through both loops of that final stitch. So I did both loops of the first stitch, the back loop all the way across until there was 1 left, and I did both loops of that last stitch, okay? So moving on to row 3, again this is the same as row 2, and this is how we're going to build that first length of ribbing. So I single crocheted in the first one, now I'm single crocheting in the back loops only of each of the next 8. As you do this one, you're going to start to see this ridge form right here. And once you do quite a few of those, you're going to see a nice ribbing effect. Okay, single crochet in both loops of the final stitch. Okay, so I have done 3 rows now. I'm going to go ahead and do some more, and I'm going to set you free to do 144 total rows, okay? And then we will meet back together to do the body of the blanket. Okay, so I have just completed 14 rows, and I'm going to make just a really tiny mini version of this blanket on this video tutorial, but hopefully you have done all of your rows, 144 of them. It doesn't matter, the pattern works the same whether you're doing a little swatch like I am or whether you're doing 144 rows for a full blanket. You just want to make sure that your row count here is an even number, and that way the blanket will work out. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to switch to a larger hook. This is the hook that we hopefully did our gauge check with. And the reason that we're switching to such a different size of hook is because when you do the linen stitch, every other stitch is a chain 1. And those chains do not have stretch to them like a normal stitch does. So if we were to continue on and do the linen stitch now up the blanket, it would pull in terribly because it's just going to be much skinnier than what you did down here. So that's why we're jumping up a couple of hook sizes to just balance things out. So for the body of the blanket, row 1, our row count starts back at 1 now because it's just easier that way. What we're going to do, my hook is still inserted exactly where my smaller hook was when I finished my ribbing. I'm going to chain 2. I'm not going to turn. I'm going to start working down this long edge of the ribbing now, okay? So here's what I want you to do. I want you to take a look at the edge of the ribbing and look at these as a series of peaks and valleys, okay? So if we're looking at these, this is the ends of our rows, you know, the rows that we just did, so this is the ends of them. But if you look at these ribbing rows, you have these peaks, which are the high parts, and then the valleys, which are low. So peak, valley, peak, valley. If you look at that, that's what I'm referencing when I tell you where to put your hook now. Because unfortunately, when we work down the sides of rows, there's not a specific double loop that we can insert our hook into like there is, for instance, up here. We know exactly to put our hook, right, when we do a stitch. Not so on the end of rows, so we kind of have to figure that out for ourselves. Okay, so what we're going to do is we are going to chain 2, which we already did, and we're going to skip over the first peak, which is this line right here, and we're going to single crochet in the valley right after it, okay? So look at the valley, follow it up, and this little spot right here, which is kind of a decent sized hole, you'll probably see it on your work as well, but it's kind of a decent sized hole there. We're going to insert our hook there and do a single crochet stitch, okay? So what we've just done, that chain 2 was actually a chain 1 space. That's what it's going to count for. Our turning chain will always count as the first chain 1 space, okay? And then we single crocheted in the valley. All right, so now in our instructions we have some parentheses, which means we're going to repeat something over and over and over again. And here's what's in the parentheses. Chain 1, skip the next peak. So again, we're going to skip over this right here, and we're going to single crochet into the next valley, and there's that obvious hole again right there. So I'm going to insert my hook and do a single crochet. So I have another chain 1 space and another single crochet. So that was in parentheses, and it says to do that across. So we're going to do the same thing over and over all the way across down the edge of this blanket. So at the beginning of the parentheses again, chain 1, skip over the peak, and insert your hook into the valley and make a single crochet. Chain 1, skip the peak, go into the valley. And you're going to do that same thing all the way down the side of your ribbing. And on your last one, you're going to do the chain 1, you're going to skip over the peak, and you're going to put that last stitch, kind of have to wrestle it in there because there's not as obvious of a hole at the corner there, but just make sure that you do get a stitch into that corner. Okay, so what we've done is the start to our linen stitch. Basically just skip a stitch, single crochet, skip, single crochet, skip, single crochet, all the way across. Okay, so go ahead and do that all the way across for row 1. At the end of it, if you did 144 rows of ribbing, you should have 72 of these chain 1 spaces and 72 single crochets. That first turning chain does not count for a single crochet. It only counts for a chain 1 space in our row count there, so if you're keeping track of that. Okay, so for row 2, and this is actually for rows 2 through 154, because as I said before, the entire body of the blanket is the linen stitch. So we're just going to do this over and over and over again with some color changes. Okay, so for rows 2 through the end of the body of the blanket, we're going to chain 2 and turn our work. And again, this chain 2 is going to count as our first chain 1 space. So what we're going to do now is we're going to skip the first stitch. Now you can tell which stitch is the first because you just chained 2. So this is the chain 2 stitches, the loops that were created by that chain 2. There's one set of loops, there's another set of loops, and so you know that this set of loops right here is your first stitch. You're skipping that stitch and you're going to single crochet in the chain 1 space that comes directly after that first stitch. Okay. And now we have a repeat again because it's in parentheses. We're going to chain 1, skip the next stitch, and single crochet into the chain 1 space after it. Okay. Chain 1, skip the next stitch, single crochet into the chain 1 space. And you're going to do that same thing all the way across. Okay, so what we just did there for row 2 is exactly what we're going to do for rows 2 through 154. The only changes we're going to make are with the colors of the yarn. So if you're following the same pattern that I did with my colors, I'm going to go ahead and put this chart up on the screen so you know exactly which colors to use and when to change colors on the pattern, okay? So for instance, we just completed row 2, and for rows 2 through 32, we're sticking with color A, so the same color that we did our ribbing. Once we finish 32 total rows, and we switch to row 33, that's when you're going to switch to color B. And so just keep track using this chart, and that's how you're going to get this pretty pattern of the color A blending into the color B, and then color B blending into color C. Okay, so all you're doing again is chain 2, turn your work, and you're just single crocheting into the chain 1 spaces, and then chain 1 again, skip, single crochet into the chain 1 space. Okay, So that is basically it for the body of this blanket, and this is going to take you a little while to do, but come on back and join me when you're finished with all of your rows, and I will show you how to do the top ribbing. And real quick, as I was just doing this one here, I wanted to mention one quick little tip. I know I have one more single crochet to do, because obviously if I were to stop here I would have a big jagged edge right here, but the chain one space is not as obvious here, so sometimes you just have to kind of dig for a little bit, but as you can see, the V's are what are standing out every time we do a stitch. So take a look at this V right here. We just want to make sure that we insert our hook to the left of that V, and that's how you'll know at the very end there that you're inserting your hook into the right spot. Okay, so a little tip there. Go ahead and finish your rows and then join me back and I'll show you how to finish it off. Okay, so I'm going to pretend that I have finished the body of my blanket. I actually only done a handful of rows here, but we're just going to pretend that we're done. So hopefully you are to the same point as well, and you're ready to start on your second section of ribbing, and this is the last part of the blanket that we have to do. So we are going to switch back to our smaller hook and go ahead and just reinsert it right where you left off. And here's what we're going to do. We're going to start off by chaining 11. And then for row 1, we're going to turn the work. So flip your blanket, keep that hook inserted though, so that we're still in the right direction here. We're going to single crochet in the second chain from the hook and in each of the remaining 9 chains. So go ahead and single crochet all the way back down the chain 11 that you just made, and you should have a total of 10 single crochets. This first part always is a little bit awkward, but once we get into it, it won't be quite so hard to hold on to it. Okay, so that's my 10 single crochets, and what I'm going to do now, and this is the sort of magical part that helps us to attach this ribbing right to the blanket as we go so that we don't have to sew it on later. So what we're going to do is we are going to slip stitch to the first stitch of the final round that we did of the body of the blanket, okay? So I have my hook here, and this is my first stitch of this row. I think I said round, I meant row. First stitch of this row, I'm going to go ahead and slip stitch to that, okay? And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to slip stitch to the chain 1 space that directly follows it, like that, okay? So what I have here is a row of 10, plus I have 2 slip stitches along row 154. Okay, for row 2, we're going to chain 1 and turn our work. We're going to skip over the 2 slip stitches that we made in the previous row, and then we're going to continue to single crochet along the 10 stitches that we made up here. Okay, so here's how to figure out exactly where to insert your hook. We have the loops that were created when we just chained 1, okay? So if you follow it down, make sure that you're looking right at the loops here. These are the set of loops created by the chain 1. These next 2 sets of loops are our slip stitches from the previous row, okay? So I know that this stitch is going to be my first stitch of the row, okay? Again, this is my chain 1, These are the 2 slip stitches, so we're skipping over all of that stuff, and we're going to insert into this stitch. And we're doing it into the back loop. So we're going to go ahead and just insert into the back loop and make a single crochet. And we're going to continue to single crochet in each of the back loops across until we have just 1 left. So that's 9 single crochets in the back loops. Okay, and I have 1 left. I'm going to go in both loops of that last one. Okay, so that was row 2. For row 3, I'm going to chain 1 and turn my work. I'm going to single crochet in the first stitch. I'm going to single crochet in the back loop only of each of the next 9 stitches. Okay, and now I'm going to slip stitch into the next single crochet and the next chain 1 space along row 154. Okay, so let's figure out where we're at here. We've got this V here, and that indicates that that was a single crochet, so that's where I'm going next. The next unworked single crochet, and I'm slip stitching. And then right after that, there's this chain 1 space, and I am slip stitching in that as well. Okay, so that's the end of row 3, and then for row 4, I'm going to chain 1, turn my work, and again, we're skipping over the slip stitches. So this is the chain 1, skip that. These next 2 are the slip stitches that we made, skip those, and my next stitch is right here, and I'm going to single crochet into the back loop only of each of these first 9 stitches. And then I'm going to single crochet in both loops of the last one. Okay, so I'm going to take my hook out here and show you. If you've never done this before, this might just feel crazy in the beginning, like what on earth is she having me do? Is this really going to work? But as you can see when I lay it out, it does work. We're starting to build a ribbing that's going to go all the way down the blanket and match the one on the other side of the blanket, okay? So no sewing involved. So what you're going to do now is you're just going to continue to repeat rows 3 and 4 over and over again all the way along the edge of your blanket until you have ribbing all the way down the end of it. Okay, so that's going to be 144 rows of ribbing, and obviously you'll know you're at the end because it'll be the end of your blanket. After that's done, you can fasten off and weave in all of your ends and your blanket is done. So here's my finished blanket. This is what it should be looking like when it's done. I've got my ribbing up here and my color changes and my ribbing down here. And one of the things that I just love about modern crochet is that it doesn't take a lot of intricate stitches to get a really modern look. In fact, the more simple your stitches are, the more modern it tends to become. If you love what you see here, you should definitely check out some of my other patterns. I have some other beautiful modern blankets on my blog, as well as lots of other home decor and accessories, scarves and hats and all kinds of fun stuff. So if you love modern crochet patterns that are free, you should definitely check out my blog at yarnandchai.com. Be sure to subscribe here so you don't miss out on any future tutorial videos. See you next time.